Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks, and you are checking out a first look video on ADSR. In this video, we'll be checking out all the new features that were added to Logic Pro 10 version 10.4.0. So this is a massive free release for Logic users. There are new plugins, there's new presets to Alchemy, there's new Apple loops, there's redesigned GUIs on older plugins, and there's a huge overhaul with how the engine handles audio and tempo syncing. So let's check it out. So to kick off this video and to show you the most information the quickest way possible, we're gonna start out talking about all the new plugins. And then if you guys wanna hang around a little bit longer, I'm gonna make a quick beat using all of these new plugins as well as the new features. So first things first, there's a whole new reverb plugin as well as a completely redesigned space designer. So in my opinion, Logic comes with two really awesome and incredibly powerful reverb plugins. Right here on the left, this is Space Designer. You guys have probably used the old one and thought it was hideous, but same features, same functionality, just a new interface. The second one to the right here is called Chromaverb, and Chromaverb is a algorithmic reverb suite. There are 14 different modes or algorithms, some of them ranging from the typical like room and concert hall to the more atypical like strange room and bloomy. It's a very cool reverb plugin, very simple to use. We'll check out more in depth later. Also added what it's calling the Vintage EQ Collection. It comes with 3 vintage emulated or modeled equalizers. There is the Vintage Console EQ at the top left here, and this is modeled after a Neve. To the bottom of that, we have the Vintage Graphic EQ, which appears to be an API emulation. And to the right of that, we clearly have the Vintage Tube EQ, which is the Pultec emulation. So now, between the channel EQ and these 3 EQs, Logic is loading you up with high-quality equalizers. Logic 10.4 also comes with 2 multi-effects plugins. They are really interesting and cool. So it looks like the same plugin right now, but they're actually different. One is your step effects and one is fat effects. The main difference obviously being down here on the step effects, you have a whole step effects or stepper. So these are just a suite of plugins. Each of them has anywhere from, depending on how you look at it, 7 to 10 different plugins. Now, interestingly enough, the fat is referencing the camel fat and camel space, I believe, with the step effects. So when Apple purchased a company called Camel Audio, that's when they ingested Alchemy, the synth. They also bought everything else that company made, and that company made some really awesome and kind of beloved plugins. One was called Camel Fat and Camel Space, and those appear to be integrated into these plugins, which is really cool. And as if all that wasn't enough, you also get 2 new software instruments. You get the Studio Horns and the Studio Strings, both of which are deeply sample libraries for horns and strings. Now, you get the horns, you have a host of single instruments, multiple saxes, multiple trumpets, trombones, as well as some sections. And you get the same type of layout with the Studio Strings. You have your single instruments, violins, violas, cellos, etc., and some small sections. We'll look at these in a little bit more depth later on in the video. All right, so let's start to build a really quick track with some of the new changes in Logic Pro 10.4. First things first, you can actually now bookmark folders in the browser. So it's as simple as opening the browser up, navigating to a folder you want to bookmark, right-clicking, and hit bookmark. Now, as you hit bookmark, a new tab will appear at the top. It's the Bookmarks tab, and you can access any folder that you bookmark just by simply clicking that. So if we were to open a new session, for instance, click our browser, we could then just go up here and hit one tab and be staring at all of the folders where we keep our sounds, samples, and loops. So I made one for this tutorial, Logic X Tutorial. I have a bunch of loops in here that I created that are for this video, but also for other things. But they're all done at different tempos. We have some done at 107 and some were recorded at 95. We're going to use these to create a beat while looking at the new plugins in Logic and looking at the smart tempo. So Logic introduced a new way to handle tempo differences and tempo variations between all audio files, and it's called Smart Tempo. If you navigate up to the top of your window here, you can see your BPM, and you'll see where it says Keep. This will then pull a drop-down menu up if you click it with the 3 different modes for the Smart Tempo. You also have the Smart Tempo project settings. I suggest the first time you use it, bounce in there and make sure you set this up. So I have set to Keep Project Tempo, and it's going to align plus on and plus align bars and beats for both recordings and imported audio files. So I could start just recording a shaker right now, no click. And Logic would attempt to quantize my audio to my BPM set in my project. So let's use these samples to create a quick track. These guitars were recorded at 95 beats per minute. I want to work at 100 beats per minute right now. So we're going to take this, we're going to click and drag it in. You'll notice as I do this, it immediately snaps it to a 4-bar loop, and it kept it at 100 beats per minute. So another improvement to the browser is if I click one of these, it will play, and we also see the audio, which is really nice. So let's click this again so it shuts up. And now we're going to do the same thing with this second file. So now I've taken these 2 guitar loops that were recorded at 95 beats per minute, and now they're playing perfectly at 100 beats per minute. All right, so I'm going to pan these out real quick. We'll pan this one to the left, and I want to do stereo pans with this guy. And we're going to pan this one out to the right, and we're going to do a stereo pan with that as well. All right, let's drag in the rest of these samples. This is a kick sample, this is a percussion sample, and this is a snap sample. Now, as we do this, all of them are going to be playing in time with our grid and our project's tempo. Logic also did some new improvements to workflow with key commands. Check this out. I can now group these tracks with a key command. If I hold Command-Shift-D, it will pull up a drop-down menu that you previously have to go to track to see that will allow me to choose to, okay, if I want to group these together, folder or summing stack. There's also the option to pull up and close plugins with key commands, both audio plugins as well as software instruments, and we're going to check that out right now. So speaking of software instruments, Logic has added 2 new deeply sampled software instruments, Studio Horns and Studio Strings. I'll pull up Studio Strings real quick, but we're not going to use that in this production. But Studio Strings gives you all these different single instruments, 5 of them, plus 4 different sections. Now, I think they sound quite good. They're not the best string samples I've ever heard, but they're definitely not the worst. They sound great, and they're definitely ready for production. So one thing I do want to point out, and I'm not going to go into too much depth with both of these new instruments, is if you are loading one up and you load, for instance, violins, and I start to play anything lower than a G2, I don't get any sound. That's because a real violin doesn't go down past G2. You click on this little arrow, and you can select extended key range, and now you can leave the actual key range of the instruments. And there's all these articulations. So let's say I want pizzicato. There it is. All right, let's load up Studio Horns because that's what we're actually going to use in this track. So I'm going to just play this real quick. Same thing. You have many different tenor, alto saxes, tenor saxes, some trombones, and some sections. We're going to keep it on trumpet right now. Let's try trumpet 2, actually. We'll leave it on trumpet 1. I'm going to go in here and take this MIDI labeled horns, and we're not going to import the tempo. We want it to keep to our tempo. So now I have this horn sound. All right, so really quick off camera, I pulled in 2 instances of Serum and loaded up a patch or 2 from Coda just to layer with our Studio Horns. And I want to do this because I want to show you that we can load up both the audio plugins on the actual channel strip or track as well as the software instruments. So check this out. If I hold down and hit Shift and Q on my keyboard, it loads up Serum, and I can hit Shift Q again to close it. Now I have Waves 1 knob filter on here. And if I hold down Shift 1 on my keyboard, it will load up the 1 knob filter. So I set these key commands up to make sense for me and to fit my hand. You can hold down Option or K and NK on your keyboard, and you'll load up your key commands. And what you can do is, like, for instance, type in Open Instrument, and you can see where it says Open Close Instrument Plugin for Window Focus Track. It's a global command. I put in my own key command. So check yours, see what it is. It might be empty depending on how you have your key command set up previously, but I then added for Open Plugin, I just did the Shift Shift 1, Shift 2, Shift 3, all the way up to 5. So I could open up 5 plugins in line. All right, so what I want to do with this one knob is I actually want to use it to apply a little bit of a filter sweep. And the reason why I'm showing you with one knob and why I'm using not a Logic plugin for this Logic tutorial, you'll see in a second. So the huge part of the update has actually been with how Logic can handle automation. Previously, you would have to, if you wanted to automate, for instance, something in Serum or a large, instrument effect or suite of effects, you'd have to go and select that, and then you would navigate through the list. And if, for instance, with Serum, that would be a huge pain in the butt, right? There's so many things happening. Well, now you can just touch a parameter within a plugin, and it will open up that automation lane. So for instance, if I go to one knob, touch this, it has now selected the filter, right? And there's only one knob on our filter. Now let me go into Serum. So I'm going to close this by hitting Shift 1, and I'm going to open Serum by hitting Shift Q. Again, I can do all this with key commands now, which is awesome. So now let's take my filter, and if I touch the cutoff knob, you'll notice that now it says filter cutoff, and we're selected in Serum. So automation is going to be a breeze moving forward inside of Logic. All right, let's start to check out some of the new plugins. I know a lot of you guys are probably chomping at the bit to see those. So there's a bunch of new plugins. There's 3 EQs. There's a whole new reverb suite. They redesigned the GUI for Space Designer, and then they've included 2 new multi-step, multi-kind of sequence type plugins that actually have been sourced from their Apple's Camel Audio's acquisition. So that's where they got Alchemy from. For those of you who don't know, Camel Audio is a company who developed Alchemy, as well as some really popular and loved plugins called Camel Fat and Camel Space. Those are now in Logic. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to load up the new reverb plugin on our lead guitar line here. And I want to show you something really nifty. I can't believe I used the word nifty, but it is kind of nifty. I'm going to go to my reverb, and I'm going to select Chromaverb. This is the new reverb plugin. Really, really beautiful interface, easy to use, easy to look at. Check this out. Because I loaded it on my actual track, the dry is set to 100%, the wet is set to 50. Now, if I load this same plugin up on a bus, let's put it on bus 2. We're going to load up Chromaverb. You'll notice that Logic's like, oh, it's on a bus. You want the wet set to 100%. Love that. I think it's really smart. So what we're going to do is we're going to audition the reverb just on the plugin so we can hear it, hear how it sounds, how it kind of functions, and then I'll move it to a bus. All right, so I'm in Chroma. There's 2 main windows to Chroma. There's the main, and then there's details, as well as the algorithm drop-down menu where you can choose between these 14 different modes of algorithm. So in the main, this is actually they call it the damping EQ. This is going to allow you to carve out and essentially kill the energy if you take it down below the line, or extend the energy for those frequencies. So let's check this out. So as you can see, and here, there are some, kind of quintessential reverb algorithms: room, chamber, concert hall, etc. Then there's things like synth hall, strange room, bloomy, really interesting reverb types. So a lot of things you can play around with. Now, you can pre-delay, you can select the pre-delay to be tempo synced, which is really nice. You have attack size, density. So this main window is just typical things you'd see on most every reverb. Now the details page is a little bit more interesting. You have an EQ, an output EQ, as well as a quality setting and some modulation sources. So you can kind of create this like pseudo coursing effect. Now something I love, Mono Maker. It'll keep the frequencies coming out of it in mono below the threshold you set. So let's just set this to 100. I don't think there's too many frequencies under 100 with the guitar, but just to show you that feature. All right, so let's say I like that, and we're going to pop this now on the bus, and we're going to turn the dry down, the wet all the way up. All right, so I like that. Now let's look at the other reverb plugin that received an update, and that is Space Designer. So I've done a couple videos on Space Designer. I actually low-key really like Space Designer, always have. And now that it doesn't look like it was made in 2005, I like it a lot more. So I'm not going to go into the features or presets, but this is the convolution reverb. The chroma verb is algorithmic, so now there's 2 high-end reverb plugins, in my opinion, in Logic. So I'm going to take this decay down. All right, that sounds pretty cool, right? Now let's look at the new multi-step effects, and I'm going to apply one too. Let's go to where it says we're going to go to Logic, and we're going to choose multi-effects. Let's try Fat Effects first. So Fat Effects is a suite of a lot of plugins. You have bandpass, you have distortion, you have mod effects, bass enhancer, a filter, a compressor, and then you also have these envelope followers. Depending on how you slice it up, anywhere between 8 and 10 different effects. And you also have an XY pad. So there's a bunch of presets. Let's load some up, because this would be a whole video talking about this on its own. I like that. A little bit of a filter modulation with appears to be an envelope. I'm going to use one of the new vintage EQs. Let's load up the graphic EQ, which is looks like a API type EQ. And I'm going to take out almost all of the lows and most of the low mids. Okay, now, because we're talking about the EQ, there are 2 other EQs. There is a Neve emulation, and that is the console EQ. And then there is also a Pultec emulation, that's the tube EQ. So there are 3 new EQs inside of this update. So let's take that off, and let's turn on our graphic again. All right, perfect. Let's load up our second multi-effect. So we're going to go to Logic, and we're going to go to multi-effects, and we're going to load up step effects. So this is for movement. It can create glitches. It can create kind of LFO type effects, anything that adds movement. You have a modulation effect, a filter, distortion, reverb, delay, master, as well as your step modulator down here. So let's load up a couple presets to see what it does. Let's try some simple gated. I like that. That's going to sound good with this. All right, guys, that sums up our look at the main new features inside of Logic Pro 10.4. There are a lot of other new features. There's some new drummer algorithms. There are some new Alchemy presets. There are some new Apple loops. Just a bunch of things happened with this release, but these were the main ones that caught my eye that I think will make creating music every day in Logic a lot easier. If you have any questions or comments, post them up below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm Echo Soundworks. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.